Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'll give folks just a couple moments to join us, and then we'll get started. The chat should be open. If you want to type in where you're tuning in from, feel free to do that. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Fabulous. If you're here and you're just joining us, feel free to use the chat feature to type in where you're tuning in from. I'd love to see where everybody is. Looks like we have some folks from Dublin, South San Francisco, Kolb Elementary School. Fabulous. I'll give folks just another moment or two to join us. All right, well, looks like we've kind of steadied out. So welcome everyone, thanks for being here. My name is Interpreter Angie, and I'm so excited to have you all here today for a Ports Home Learning Program, a way for you all to access our virtual field trips from home, or maybe you weren't able to get on in time to book a private program this year. So this is a great option for all of you who are interested in ports, but maybe just want to try it out or didn't have a slot for this year. So thank you for joining us. So I've set the chat so you can only chat to me. So our other participants shouldn't be seeing the other answers, but please do kind of use the chat respectfully today. And if it gets to a point where I need to disable that, I will do that. So let's go ahead and get started. So like I said, my name is Angie and I'm an interpreter for California State Parks. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm really excited to have you all here today with me. So, of course, all of our California state parks are located here in the beautiful state of California. And to give you a sense of where I am, I'm all the way up here in a city called Eureka, California. It's about 5 hours drive north of San Francisco. So it's truly in Northern California. We're almost to the Oregon border, and it's a really, really special place. So we're going to be exploring this part of the coastline today specifically, and I'm excited to have you here. So before we start, I want to do a little exercise with everybody, which is I want everybody to imagine that they are visiting an aquarium, okay? And you have a tour guide, and your aquarium tour guide is telling you about all the cool things there are to see in this aquarium. So first they say, behind door number 1, you'll find the kelp forest exhibit. Behind door number 2, you'll find the tide pool exhibit. Behind door number 3, you might find a beautiful view of the Pacific Ocean. And behind door number 4, you'll find our Seabird Rehabilitation Center, okay, where we're helping seabirds get healthy so we can release them back into the wild. And after they tell you about those 4 things, they let you know that the tour's over and ask if you have any questions. So I'm curious if any of my students out there have any questions for our aquarium tour guide on our imaginary tour. If you have a question, go ahead and type it in the chat. I see some folks raising their hands, so just go ahead and type in the chat. Somebody said, door number 5, what's behind door number 5? Yeah, of course, that's the most common question I get. And imagine if your tour guide said, well, we don't really explain what's behind door number 5 to visitors. We're still kind of learning about it. So it's kind of like not open to the public at this time. And I want you to now think, if that was their answer, how would that make you feel? If you could describe your feeling in one word with an emotion, maybe, what would that emotion be? Go ahead and type that in the chat. All right, we have multiple answers coming in for curious, odd, sad, confused. Yeah, maybe feeling left out, or suspicious, maybe. Lost, surprised. Yeah, totally. I think the most common answer coming in is curious, though. And that is exactly how I would feel as well. Now, today we're going to be exploring the idea of curiosity and how our curiosity for the unknown is our doorway to discovery. And we're going to be exploring some places that maybe we don't know very much about, that we've probably never been to. And we have to really keep an open mind in order to walk through that doorway of discovery and follow our curiosity. Now, the second part of my story has to do with this little creature right here. You might be able to guess who this is. If you see the resemblance, that's me when I was probably a similar age to many of you who are tuning in today. And I grew up on the central coast of California in San Francisco. And this was taken on a beach kind of near Pescadero. And I loved to explore the beach. I was lucky enough to get to go to the beach a lot when I was younger. I would climb on the driftwood and dig in the sand and just hang out and enjoy the beautiful California coastline. But I specifically remember as a young child being at the beach and looking over the Pacific Ocean and feeling a lot of those same emotions that you all just typed in. Really curious, maybe a little bit suspicious, maybe a little bit overwhelmed even by the possibility that there was this thing that I just was so close to me, but I wasn't able to explore it maybe as fully as I wanted to, kind of like door number 5, right, in our imaginary story. But mostly I felt really, really curious about the ocean. And I'm sure, and every time I ask my students this, have you ever stood by the ocean and felt really curious or kind of overwhelmed with a sense of wanting to know more? And most of my students that have had the pleasure of being on the beach raise their hand and say, I've totally felt that way too. And so I want to tell you that my curiosity for the unknown, my curiosity for the ocean has led me here today. So today I am a scuba diver and a scuba dive instructor. I'm on the California State Scuba Diving team. And I put together this video, all of my personal video clips from my camera. So these are all places that I've been. There's me again. And I wanted to share how my curiosity for the ocean led me underwater to be able to see a lot of these places for myself and be able to discover some things that I never could have imagined that I would have experienced when I was a kid. So I've been in some really cool kelp forests and made some really awesome friends along the way. Been able to swim and be surrounded by schools of fish and enjoy all the colors that the underwater world has to offer. Been able to swim with really big fish and really small fish. I love to peek behind and underneath and inside of rocks and crevices to see what I can find. And one time I even got to scuba dive with bull sharks. You're going to see my reaction in just a moment. You could say I was pretty excited after that. I've even been inside of sunken shipwrecks like this one. So you're about to see me wave to you in just a moment. It's been a pretty amazing journey so far. And this all started because I was curious about the ocean, and it led me through this doorway of discovery of being a scuba diver and getting to explore these amazing places and see these amazing animals. So that gives you a sense of where I'm coming from. Obviously, I'm pretty excited about the ocean, and I've had the opportunity to explore it a little bit myself. So I want to see what observations you have about our planet, because these are observations that I made as well when I was younger. And I want you all to imagine if the whole entire surface of planet Earth was split into 10 equal slices like this. How many of those slices do you think, or do you know, are covered by land, and how many are covered by water? So think about this, type your answer in the chat. If you're going to type a number, be sure to pair it with either land or water, so I know exactly what your guess is. And your two numbers should add up to 10, because we want to make sure we're accounting for every single slice in our pizza. Awesome. So we have a guess coming in for 6 water, 4 land. Somebody said 70 ocean and 30 land. So maybe using percentages instead of our 10 slices. Somebody said 6 part water, 7 part water. Great guesses. Yeah. So actually about 7 of those slices, or about 70% of our planet, is covered by water. And only 3 of those slices, or 30%, is covered by land. And it's actually similar proportions for our body, right? About 70% of our body is made up of water as well. Isn't that interesting? Our planet and our bodies have this cool thing in common. And I, of course, as a kid was like, okay, 3 slices of land is cool, but as a land animal, I was like, I need to find a way to explore some of this, the rest of the majority of the planet, which is these blue portions, right? So now you know where I'm coming from and how my experience in the ocean has led me to a few cool places, and my curiosity hasn't been fully quenched yet. So what I want to talk about next is how sometimes the most remote places in the world can host the most mystery. Okay, so I don't mean remote like a TV remote. I mean remote like it's maybe far away place, or it's a place that's hard to get to or that few people have ever visited. So oftentimes those types of places host the most mystery or are the most mysterious. So up where I live in Northern California in Humboldt County, some people would say it's pretty remote. Like I said, it's about a 5-hour drive just from San Francisco. And many people haven't even visited Humboldt County, even if they live in California. So a couple really cool things about what we have up in Northern California. The first one is these things right here. So these are the old growth redwood trees. So these are actually the tallest trees in the whole world. So if you've been sitting down all morning, you might want to stand up and give yourself a nice big stretch and embody the redwood trees, right? So the tallest trees in the whole world. And these trees can be thousands of years old, okay? And unfortunately, there's only a small number of the oldest, tallest redwood trees left because many of them were cut down to build cities and build houses. But we're lucky because the ones that are left, most of them are protected in our state parks, which means people can come and visit them and hike amongst them and camp amongst them, but we're not allowed to cut them down when you're in a state park, right? So just like the trees are protected, also the soil and all the understory plants and the animals that live in this habitat are kept safe by our California state parks, which are pretty awesome. So these trees and these forests will be waiting for you when it's your turn to come up to Northern California and visit them, and we're excited to say that. Now, the other cool thing about the North Coast is our coastline. And there's this place right here called the Lost Coast. And the Lost Coast is a really special place, but it's also very remote. Now, you might notice that this land along the coastline looks a lot different than a lot of the other coastal areas on the California coast, mainly in that there's not any big cities or towns or mansions or roads or highways along this stretch of the coastline. And very few people have actually been out to the Lost Coast compared to some other parts of California, right? So if you want to get out to these remote parts, you have to either walk there or maybe take a boat there. Okay, so this is the last undeveloped stretch of coastline in California. And along this stretch of coastline, there are things called marine protected areas, or MPAs. And not only do MPAs exist here, they actually exist all the way up and down the coast. And today we're going to visit one of these remote marine protected areas that's along the Lost Coast and see what kind of cool stuff we can find. Now, to give you a sense of our ocean, right, because we're going to be focusing on the ocean today, I put this diagram here which shows you roughly some of the zones that the ocean has. Okay, so, and you all probably know now, I showed you my video, you're like, she is an ocean explorer. She has been in the ocean. But I will tell you that the only zone of the ocean that I've ever been to is the sunlight zone, the very top 650 feet of the ocean. Okay, and that's where all the waves are and the currents are. That's where kelp forests are and where people tide pool and go surfing and go boating and kayaking, right? So this is the place where most humans have explored, right? But today we're going to be exploring a little bit more of a remote part of the ocean called the Twilight Zone. So we're going to be lucky enough to dive down to about 2,000 feet below the surface along the Lost Coast in a marine protected area to see what kind of cool stuff we can see. But I want you to also keep in mind that we are not going to the deepest parts of the ocean, right? So the trenches, the abyss, and the midnight zone are even deeper, even more remote, more mysterious, and just keep that in mind and stay curious about what things might also exist in these zones. So to give you a little more of a sense of where we're going, so this is the Lost Coast again. Again, no big cities or towns. There's just one road that comes out here. And I want you specifically to focus on what this underwater kind of topography looks like. All right, so there's this darker area that's indicated on our map. And a lot of people think, oh, that must be a mountain, or that must be maybe the trenches or different zones of the ocean. Now, it's not a mountain. It does look similar on a map to a mountain, but actually this is called a submarine canyon. And it's not quite the trenches. It's not the very deepest part of the ocean, but this is going to be the Twilight Zone that we're visiting today. So it's about 2,000 feet deep, specifically in our marine protected area indicated here that we're going to be visiting. Okay, and this red color means that nobody's allowed to take anything from this area. So it's kind of like a state park, just like how you can't take redwood trees with you when you leave the park. You can't take fish or rocks or any stuff when you visit this type of marine protected area. It's called a state marine reserve. It's kind of like a safe zone for all marine life, where humans aren't allowed to take or disturb things. Right, so now you know where we're going. It's a pretty remote place, and I'll tell you, it's a little mysterious. But before we go, I want to make sure we have all of the skills and tools that we need in order to explore this place fully. Okay. And one thing that all great explorers in the world have in common is that they're all really good observers. Okay, so they're really good at noticing things, noticing details. And I want to make sure we practice our skills of observation today so that we're well on our way to being good explorers as well. So I want you to think for a moment, what types of jobs or careers might require you to be a good observer? If you have an idea, maybe type in the chat what you're thinking. Okay, somebody said maybe police officers. Yeah, so police officers might need to have really good skills for observing the community in order to keep people safe. Someone also said doctors and nurses. Yeah, so they're observing kind of changes in their patients' bodies, maybe their physical health, their mental health, and doing things to help them be healthier, right? Somebody also said firefighters. Yeah, so other first responders, they might need to act quickly and focus on changes that are happening rapidly. Someone else said a spy, maybe, or a detective. Absolutely. And somebody said a scuba diver. Yeah, scuba divers have to be good observers as well. So I specifically want to focus on detectives. So there's a really famous detective whose name is Sherlock Holmes. Maybe some of you have heard of him. And there's a quote from him that goes like this: "I see no more than you. I've just learned to notice what I see." And so today we're going to practice noticing the things we see so that we can make really good observations. Okay. And in order to do that, I have 3 tools from my toolbox that I want you all to use. The first one, there are 3 types of statements. So types of expressing or sharing what you observe. The first one is, I notice. The second one is, I wonder. And the third one is, it reminds me of. And we're going to use these today. And I'll go over each one very briefly. All right. So I notice. When we are sharing something that we notice, I want you to start your sentence with, I notice. And then you're going to follow it up with an observation, right? And an observation is something that you make with your senses, whether it's your sense of sight, your sense of smell, your sense of touch, or your sense of taste. Today, we're mostly going to be using sight because we're on a virtual field trip. But if you were doing making observations in another setting, you might be able to use some of your other senses as well, right? Okay, a couple of guidelines for I notice statements. The first one is we're not going to try to identify things in a simple way. So instead of saying, I notice a fish, you might say, I noticed a fish whose body was shaped like a football and it seemed to be swimming really fast and it had spikes on its back. Okay, so instead of just naming it or giving it a name that you think might be correct, I want you to pay close attention to the details, maybe the things that stand out to you. Okay, and the second thing that we're going to try to stay away from is sharing our opinions about something. So instead of saying, I notice it's gross, you might say, I notice that the environment or this habitat looks really dirty or dusty. Or I notice that animal looks really slimy. Okay, so these are our guidelines for I notice. The second one, remember, is I wonder, and it ends in a question mark, which means this is your opportunity to ask questions about what you see. So you might say, I wonder if, I wonder how, I wonder when, I wonder why, and I wonder what. Okay, so any questions you have about what you see, the way you're going to ask them is start with I wonder and then follow up with your question. Okay, and the last one is it reminds me of. And this one's my favorite because it's your opportunity to make connections to what you see. So you might say, wow, looking at that reminded me of this movie that I saw, or this book that I read, or this place that I went with my friends or my family. It could be anything, right? It could remind you of a feeling that you've had before. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to be visiting two different habitats in the deep sea. They're kind of like two different neighborhoods, right? A habitat is a place where living and non-living things are interacting and basically creating a home for animals, right? And the first one we're going to visit is called the Rocky Reef. So I want everyone to say Rocky Reef and stomp your feet. Nice. Now, the second one we're going to visit is called the Soft Bottom. And these are two of the main types of underwater habitats we have in California. Now, the soft bottom, I want everyone to say soft bottom and go like this. Now, you might notice that those two different movements and the sounds that they created were pretty different. That might give you a hint that these two habitats are pretty different places. So first, we're going to visit the Rocky Reef. And as we explore and view what the Rocky Reef looks like, I want you to start making observations. What do you notice? What do you wonder? And what does this experience or this place remind you of? Maybe you can write those things down. You can draw pictures. You can share with somebody you're learning next to, and then we'll come back together and share as a group at the end. All right, here we go into the Rocky Reef. Remember to try to use those tools I gave you. I notice, I wonder. And this reminds me of. All right, friends, pretty cool to be able to see this habitat in the deep sea, right? In the Twilight Zone. So first, let's start with I noticed. Does anybody have something that they notice that they want to share? If you do, go ahead and type it in the chat. If you're tuning in with an entire class, maybe get a pool of a couple answers and then you can type them all in at once. I'll share one thing that I noticed. I noticed that the habitat seemed to be covered with really big kind of boulders. There was a lot of structures. Great, somebody just typed in the chat, I noticed the ground looks rough. Yeah, so maybe there's a lot of texture. There's a lot of kind of relief on the ground. Somebody said, I noticed that there's not many sea creatures, or maybe not as many as you were expecting. Somebody said, I noticed the coral is pink. Now, very interesting, because this is kind of an observation. And although there's things that you might see in the deep sea that you think are coral, we have to keep our mind open to the idea that we might not actually know what some of these animals or some of these features are, right? So maybe I noticed a lot of pink things that I'm not sure exactly how to identify. I noticed that the octopus's skin maybe looked rough. Okay, great. Yeah, those are great observations. Thanks, everyone. Let's move on to I wonder. Now, somebody typed in, I wonder if the octopus is trying to find food. So maybe having a question about their behavior. Why are they doing that certain thing? Why are they moving in that certain way? What are they looking for? Any other questions? Any other I wonders? Give you all a moment to type. I wonder if the octopus is trying to hide. I wonder why there are so many coral reefs. Okay, interesting. So similar to the other coral comment. Now, the thing about cold waters of Northern California is we actually don't have very many corals here. So things that you saw might have reminded you of coral, but we have to keep an open mind to maybe those are different types of animals that we just haven't been introduced to yet. I wonder if this is where the rock cod live. Okay, so maybe I'm wondering about this animal I learned before, and I wonder if they live in this habitat. Awesome. All right, let's move on to it reminds me of. Did this remind you of anything you've seen before, you've experienced before, maybe a feeling you've had before? I know for me, seeing this reminds me of going on a night hike in a state park. So walking around the forest at night and maybe enjoying the darkness and experiencing the park or the place in a different way. Somebody said, I wonder why the octopus was running away. Somebody said, the octopus reminds me of intestines. Yeah, so maybe the way that it's kind of fluid body reminds you of another type of body part or an organ of another animal. It reminds me of a dark mountain. Yeah, great. Those are all really great connections. Thanks, everybody. So now that we've talked about the rocky reef a little bit, somebody said, it reminds me of a cartoon. It doesn't look real, right? And maybe this doesn't look real because this is a place where humans have not been able to experience very thoroughly, right? This is kind of a new experience for many of us. So really good connections. So now we've experienced the rocky reef, but I promised we were going to see two habitats today. So let's head into the soft bottom and we'll do the same thing. Remember, we're doing I notice, I wonder, and it reminds me of, maybe pay particular attention this time to how the rocky reef and the soft bottom are different from each other and how this might impact the animals that live there. All right, friends, that was the soft bottom. Let's see, what did you notice? I notice the stingray is trying to run away. I notice the fish are trying to run away. Okay, so maybe we can make some inquiries about why that's happening. Why are they, I wonder why they're running away from the camera or from the lights. Someone said, I noticed that the stingray was camouflaged in the sand, right? So maybe there was more animals relying on camouflage in this habitat versus the rocky reef. I noticed the ground had a lot of sand. Maybe the ground and the relief of this area was much different than the rocky reef. I noticed some of the animals were the same color as the sand. Yeah, absolutely. All right, friends, let's move on to I wonder. Anybody have a question? I wonder why the sea animals were running away. I wonder if they're running away from the light. Yeah, great. I wonder why the stingray was trying to hide. I wonder if the stingray has a stinger in its tail. I wonder what is on the rocks. Okay, cool. Nice. I notice a lot of camouflage. Fabulous. All right, let's move on. It reminds me of, does this habitat in the Twilight Zone remind you of anything specific? Maybe a connection from your past. It reminds me of a very soft bed. I love that one. Yeah, it does. A lot of times this reminds me, oh, somebody just typed it in. It reminds me of the beach. Yeah, so this looks really similar to the sandy beach that we might have along the coast of California or around the world, right? This is a similar habitat. It's just submerged. Nice. Good connections, everyone. So again, just a reminder, we started off looking at the sunlight zone, right? And I showed you my scuba dive experience, that what led me, my curiosity led me to be a scuba diver. And I've explored the sunlight zone fairly thoroughly, right? And we got to explore the Twilight Zone together. But remember that we're still even towards the top layers of the ocean here. Even though few people have been to the Twilight Zone, there's even these more remote places that are going to require great explorers with really good observation skills. So maybe some of you are going to be those people in the future, which is so awesome. So you all just had a chance to flex your observation skills and become better explorers as we went through this activity. What I want to leave you all with today is that the process of discovery, the process of following our curiosity, often leaves us with more questions than answers, right? So you asked a lot of great questions, you made a lot of observations, and you made great connections. And I didn't answer your questions today. Instead, we all focused in on the things that we were most curious about, whether it's camouflage or the different features of the habitat or the different color patterns that we saw or animal behavior, right? And I want you all now to observe the things that you noticed, the things that you were curious about, the connections that you made, and see if there's any patterns there. And that you might be able to say like, wow, I'm pretty interested in camouflage. I think I'm going to research that some more. Or I'm really interested in different habitat types. I think I'm going to research that some more. So it gives you a place to understand yourself better and understand what your interests are. So I hope you all can walk away from that experience with that takeaway today. And with that, I'll just say thank you all so much for coming. And I hope you all had a great virtual field trip with me today. Be sure to check out the Ports website for both private Ports programs and more home learning programs like this. And feel free to reach out to us on social media as well. We're Ports Program on Facebook and Instagram. And I'm up in the North Coast Redwoods District. You can find us on both Facebook and Instagram if you just type in California State Parks North Coast Redwoods. So hope you have a great rest of your day. See you next time.